Hi everybody, welcome into one of our final soirees into the DuFour textbook where we're going to be talking about what you do when kids don't learn. Once again, it is a beautiful November day in Oklahoma with bright sunshine, which is normally great that it's a beautiful day with bright sunshine, but it might be a little difficult to read the slides. When we're talking about this chapter, this is probably what I would consider to be one of the most important chapters in the text because, I mean, and I'm being honest with all of you, I haven't 1,000,000% bought in to the PLC movement and all the overemphasis that's done on professional learning communities. So out of all the chapters, I think even if you're not a PLC person, and as this is a required textbook for the class, as you all know, this one offers more than some of the other textbooks do, the other chapters in the book do, because anybody can look at this and anybody can say, well, this is what I'm supposed to do when kids don't learn. The key notion is this idea that most teachers just kind of press on. They say, you know what, this is my plan, this is what I got to do, I got to finish this. But one of the things that DuFour and Marzano really stresses is this notion of change and being dynamic enough where you can change the lesson midway through if you need to do that. So there are two different responses when this occurs. One is this school-wide response. Some schools reset completely, and we've talked about this the entire course, and we've been really mentioning school reform issues. Others look over different techniques that may or may not work. So I'll give you some ideas that have been implemented and some thoughts on each one, and I really want you to think about this and consider this perspective. So the first one is the one we've all seen in our experience in schools. We've all seen the school that just says, I'm going to add a new curriculum program and or textbook. And that textbook and that curriculum program is going to change absolutely everything, and that's going to make the decisions. The other one, which it's I lived this in my old position, was this idea of the scripted lesson. When my old position as a program coordinator and working with rural school districts in Lawrence County in Pennsylvania, a few of them had switched to Success for All and scripted lessons, and I hated having student teachers in there doing this, and it was a massive issue and a massive problem. The reconfiguration of schools, this is big in every state, but you're obviously seeing this in Oklahoma too. I would argue this is more because of growing population than anything else. The whole block schedule idea, moving from 50-minute periods to 90-minute periods, I think it's good in high school. I think there should be longer periods in high school because it preps kids for college, but you do know that this does exist, and you do know this does exist in our system. And then we have the notion of elementary schools that are cored and departmentalized, where teachers rotate, and you've seen this in a lot of your school systems as well. These are all big ideas. I think we've seen these all done in our systems, and we've seen them work to varying degrees of success. Other ones, we have this notion of the additional levels in tracking and lower in tracking. And if you've read a historical study, I have a background in sociology of education too, and I've done work with the Rosenthal and Jacobson Pygmalion in the classroom study, which I think is fascinating. But that one, that when you track and put people in lower tracks, that creates such a barrier and such a problem that everybody loses. Uniforms. I don't know. You can interpret that any way you want to. We've all seen this. We've all seen when school policies change. I don't necessarily know if uniforms help or hinder the learning process. Some of you might have a different opinion on me than this. Giving extrinsic rewards. Yeah, this works. If you give kids movie tickets, iPods, or money for performance, that's how society operates. We operate through extrinsic rewards. That's what business is. So I've seen this work. I've seen it work better for attendance than for learning, but I have seen it work for attendance. And then we also have this notion of merit bonuses for people who score higher on a test, and give it to the teachers. There are positives and negatives to that too, because then you ask the question, are the teachers actually teaching? Are they teaching to the test? Is that okay? Is that ethical? Do you have a problem with that? I mean, it could go either way. And the other notions are raising the requirements to enter the teaching profession or making it easier. I'm very cynical when it comes to this. I think it's way too easy to enter the teaching profession, but part of my research is that it's a pocketed regional phenomenon, which means that it only happens at the regional level. So that's something else that could be potentially an option as well. So some schools allow students to retake a standardized test or even a benchmark assessor or quiz. Some schools say no, this is the score, this is what it is. Some schools will contact parents, some don't. Some work with students before and after school, some don't. Some will return student work and require a student to make changes until it meets to a point, and some just give a failing grade. This tells me that there's a major inconsistency in delivery and in execution of all of these principles. So the big thing that they're looking at is response to intervention, which DuFour doesn't exactly think it's the right solution. He thinks the idea and the principle is there, but not the implementation. My experience with RTI, it's pretty biased because the few people here that have background at RTI, I really respect. The people that have been able to have good conversations with me about it know what they're doing, and that's really big for me. But in my previous position, I can't say that was the case. We had some very strong people in it, and we had some people that were very limited in their background in RTI. So I'm going to go over the 10 common mistakes of RTI. I have a lot of background in this. I was early childhood as an administrator, and I integrated all the technology down into our elementary schools in the district that I worked in. That gives me kind of this foundation of whether RTI is effective or ineffective, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, I've tried to see it and put it in a way that I frame it appropriately. So hopefully you can at least look at that. I think it's the way that DuFour does it. He talks about what's gone wrong with it, but I think that'll give you a better understanding and it'll be more targeted on RTI. So the first mistake is this idea that it then becomes traditional schooling and not intervention. And I have seen this done a million times. If RTI is to work successfully, it has to be an intervention, it has to be continuous, and it has to be cycled for students as they need it. It has to be a natural part of the curriculum and not an extension. And that is a big, big, big idea. And that's something that when you're looking at these programs that are supposed to save the world, that's one of the things that I think always comes to mind, especially with RTI. The checklist method. One of the things I like about RTI is that it's a checklist. One of the things that I don't like about RTI is that it's a checklist. We've got to a point where RTI has been used as a compliance strategy, which has caused it difficulties in using it for its intended purpose and what it is. Compliance doesn't lead to guaranteed student learning. It can or can't be, in all honesty. It's reactive rather than proactive. When intervention plans have no actual policies in place for supporting students until they failed, you're letting them fail first so that they can be identified. In many school districts do this. I think this is one that we can all read this and we can agree we've seen this happen. There's not additional time or differentiated support to learning. If you have an intervention strategy, you should be extending and modifying instead of just giving people the time to just repeat what they covered in class. It should be where adaptations and modifications are made. And I struggled to see this with reading instruction in some of the Pennsylvania public schools because they weren't using RTI for what it was supposed to be for. So it invites students to access available interventions. That's another big idea and an important concept. If students are just stopping in and getting help, then you're only getting the students who are taking the initiative to get help, and you're not taking the students that might necessarily need help, especially if it's something that's done during a common planning time or a common planning period. I've seen that as a massive mistake with RTI, and I've seen some struggles and problems with that. So it's based on seat time rather than proficiency. that is a massive problem because we're not looking as to whether or not the students get the concept, and we're looking at it as to whether or not the students are there and they're receiving the intervention. Some students don't need much help. When I think about reading practice, I think of some students who have some comprehension issues more than their actual issues with performance in technical skills to read. And that was one of the big problems that I saw in the Pennsylvania public schools, was students who couldn't grasp main idea, couldn't connect plot, or even compare it to other stories. And that's something that's a targeted approach and might require more or less time than other approaches. So the problem is, when we get funding for RTI, and once again, you know me, everything comes back to money. Because it comes back to money, you have to pay people based on seat time, and that's how you get the teacher that can be the RTI teacher. And that's a problem in Oklahoma, that's a problem in Pennsylvania, it's a problem in Florida, it's a problem everywhere. So this notion that it focuses on symptoms rather than causes, if a student is assigned to RTI because they're failing reading, we're basically saying we're going to stop you from failing reading, but we're not saying, well, you're failing reading because. You have to make sure that skills are individually diagnosed, which has been a big idea throughout this course, and it's why this topic is a doc course at Oklahoma State and it's not a master's course, because you as potential district officers have to teach your principals how to appropriately respond to interventions and determine the support that students need, and that comes really from the district office telling the principals and helping them work with the teachers. I think this one is a bigger problem than a lot of the other ones, because we're just saying they're failing, so we're giving them A, B, and C, instead of saying, well, they failed because. And I think that's a big challenge with RTI. So, looking at the channels of communication, another big district level problem that I see in our school system is the fact that we just assume that if a teacher is SPED, they're going to be able to go in and do the RTI interventions as diagnosed. There has to be continuity between what the teacher knows, what the principal knows, and what the district office's mission is for RTI. And this involves the coaches that we've talked about, it involves guidance counselors, it involves school administrators, collaborative teams. Guidance counselors are a little funky on this because some of them do have teaching pedagogy practice and some don't. But that's certainly something that you can keep in mind. I would say you would have to go on the skill level of your guidance counselor and what their background is. If they're a counseling person, or if they're an education person that transition into the position. This one, I don't necessarily agree with this, but I guess it is the case here. I haven't seen this, but some of you might be able to tell me a little bit more about it. If the paraprofessionals are the people that are doing the RTI modification, that is a massive freaking problem. You know, this is the problem that needs to be addressed and fixed as soon as it possibly can be, because these are the students that you need to perform and you need to do better. Don't give a paraprofessional the job of helping these students out. That is a big, big no-no and a big mistake. It's viewed as a special ed program. Yeah, in most districts it is, but it shouldn't be the property of the special ed department. This has to be a collaborative approach and has to be shared. It has to be shared between teachers, and that's a big idea. So, some recommendations for intervention. We're going to go over these as well. You can take a look at these, and once again, you can actually look at these and determine where they are. So, the plan of intervention must begin by providing students with access to effective instruction each day. It has to be part of the daily curriculum. It can't be just an extension. It has to be built into the system, and the teachers need to be doing assessment as needed. It has to be proactive rather than reactive, and I think that's the biggest idea. You have to see when a student has the potential to fail or not perform well on a benchmark exam, and use RTI as a way to help support them, not to catch them up. When students meet the proficiencies and they're doing well, they shouldn't be going to RTI time. We shouldn't just be throwing students to the special ed teacher or the intervention specialist and saying this is now your job. But we know in our school system this is a common problem that does occur. So teachers must be individuals, and some teachers are going to be better at reaching students and helping them in providing support. Different assessments and different teaching styles are really going to make a difference into how the students perform, and it's supposed to help with the learning process of each student. The process as a whole needs to be multi-layered with time and support learning as variables rather than constants. If an assessment isn't going right, you need to switch it, and you need to look for patterns in student performance when change happens. Anytime that you make a change to an assessment process, especially in elementary schools, and it's tough because I'm coming from that elementary lens on this particular set of information, the students take a while to adjust to it. When that happens, you're going to not do well in the beginning, but then the procedure itself will change eventually. So it has to be a directive rather than invitational plan. Students that are most in need of help are the ones that are going to pursue help. The school has to have a process in place to help those students and assign those students to intervention where necessary. It has to be fluid and flexible. As soon as a student hits the proficiency point and you think as an instructor that they're going to sustain, then get them out of the intervention process and get a student in who is potentially in danger of not meeting their particular objectives. If you're able to do that, that's going to help, and students should flow in and out of the process as needed. Once again, different precision in individualized objectives. There are going to be students who need a lot more support with certain big ideas, and they shouldn't be placed into a group because they're not doing well on a subject. They should be grouped and they should be given support if it's a specific competency and a specific goal with the subject. That is a big idea. So the plan of intervention has to address the needs of both non-intentional and intentional non-learners. Some teachers are going to be able to diagnose problems better than others. Some will not. An effective teacher is going to understand when it's time to get the parents involved, when it's not time to get the parents involved, and really push that out and push that direction, especially when the family can provide resources that can help. So we've already talked about being systematic in your approach. Any time the student requires intervention, it has to be appropriate, and it has to be done based on the criteria that's established by the school. That has to be a pattern that has to be identified, and the people that are identifying a student for intervention have to understand what that criteria is. I guess I could relate this back again to not throwing everything in the hands of the paraprofessional, but that's also a consideration here as well. So the teacher has to be proactive. One of the things that I like about RTI and why I think is a system it works, and this is, me being in my mid-30s, having gone through teaching in the early 2000s, I like the fact that when RTI was being rolled out in school systems, it actually said people had deficiencies and struggled with subjects. That meant that they didn't need additional support in areas that they were performing well in areas that they struggled with, they would get the additional support they needed. I think this is a huge idea of this entire process because we can target different subjects and specialists, and we can support those students in meeting the needs that they can in those subjects. And then that's what makes its intervention successful. I believe in this notion of enrichment, and to me this is very, very, very important. I despise it when we have systems in place that say, we're just telling people to go online, and then they're our best and most proficient students, and they're just existing. We have to enrich our systems for the students that are our best and brightest, so they don't get bored, and also so that they don't leave our public school system in favor of something else. And I don't think that we've seen this much in Oklahoma yet, but I swear to you, in other states and other districts, we're seeing this push for the STEM Academy model, which, although a great model, is taking our best and the brightest away from our traditional public schools. Will it come to Oklahoma? I don't know. But with international baccalaureate schools, STEM academies, and charters and magnets really taking these over, this is a big